Let's just have a look back here at these brackets that sit on the back of the intake manifold, because it's super hard to see once it's all in place. So there's this bracket here that holds the power steering line. It sits up on this, and there's a nut holding there, and then this one here sits onto the intake manifold. There's also a bolt hole here, so a bolt here goes into the intake manifold and here. So what we're going to do is we'll sit the intake manifold in, we'll do these two up first, then I'm going to move that bracket in place, and we'll do this nut and this bolt up here. We also have one plug down here, and there's a little notch here for a vacuum tubing. So that's how it all sits. You're not going to be able to see much while I'm doing it, but that's how it sits in place. So just quickly recapping that now, looking at the back of the manifold, here are the 3 bolts that will need to be done up. And then there's obviously that other sort of bracket from the power steering line that sits over here. And this is the vacuum hose that gets clipped into that, and our connector. Now to fit this in, generally there's this bracket that comes up in here. So we need just to pop this off on one of the sides. Pop it off there. Incredibly tight. There we go. Okay, so to get this in position, I've got both of the vacuum tubes undone. We'll just sit them out like that. Just run this in. It does sort of catch up on things, but it's not too bad. It's up and out of the way. Okay, so then once it's in position, it just sits firmly like that. You can see sitting nicely up against there, nice and flat. And this is actually a little bit of an angle. But before we kind of begin to bolt anything in here, we need to get this gasket in place, and I need to get those studs in place. Okay, so with the intake manifold just sitting in loosely, I want to get my gasket in, make sure it's the right way around. So we've got sort of 3 bolt holes at the top, 2 at the bottom. And just kind of create a little bit of the space there and slide that in. I'm going to grab one of the studs, just get it lined up on one first. Next side in. And just make sure that you line it up with your gasket. I'll just quickly do up these studs. This is obviously not tightening the intake at all. And we've got the nuts that fit on each end. And 3 bolts, one right in the middle. Wiggle it all, make sure the line's up, and I'm just going in finger tight. Now the one on this side's a little bit harder to reach, so just going to put a bit of tape on there that holds it. Let's see if I can get it in from this way. Once this gets started, it's not that difficult to keep it running in, but it's just hard to get it started. Look, that's winding in now. Just try and get it finger tight as well. Now, as I said before, you're not going to be able to see much here, but I've just put the pipe in that little connector, that little holder, sorry, and then we'll bring this back up. This one comes up to here and hits on something on that top intake. The other one comes around underneath that bracket and then up to that little valve on this side. And we've also got an electrical connector here, so we'll plug that in as well. Okay, so the rubber hose is plugged in, the electrical connector is plugged in, and we've got this longer pipe here sitting in that little holder. Let's start looking at these bolts at the back here. And I'm just doing these up finger tight. If you remember, I kind of pushed that bracket out of the way a little bit, so it's going to have to bend back a little bit as well. If everything's just finger tight, you should have some wiggle room, and these should just run in nicely for you. So I've got the first two bolts that go through the bracket that attaches to the block. We haven't done this one here yet, so we'll do that next. Going to do these up, and then we will tighten those up, and then we'll put this bracket on here. Now I haven't looked up the torque specs on these, so I'm just kind of going to go slow. So we'll just going to start from one side because it's a little bit easier. Just go along and just do them up firm, and then I'm just going to do a couple of passes. These lower ones here are kind of tricky to get to from the top because you just don't get a lot of movement. But you can do it, or you can try and reach in from underneath. Okay, so with these all bolted up to the head, I now want to do just the two bolts that secure this intake to the bracket. So there are those 10mm bolts. And if you remember, I did push this bracket out of the way a little bit, so I've kind of got to tighten it up and pull it back into place. Now just doing the second one. So next, I'm just going to take that nut off that I had stored there. Now this is the bracket for the power steering. So it comes around. Hopefully we can get all this on camera. It sits on there. I'll just run that nut on. And then we've just got the one bolt that sits in here. Okay, so that actually goes together much easier than it comes apart, just because you can see what you're doing. Let's get this wiring still up and out of the way again. Now, if you've been watching closely and you'll remember, I took the entire fuel rail off because I had some issues with mine. And I'd also lost one of the injector seals in the intake. Look, I didn't mention it, but I've cleaned that up. I've cleaned the surface of these intakes up as well. But I am going to replace these. I've already pulled that one off. Just to double check that I had the sizing. Pop all of those off. Now, this one here that pulled out in the intake manifold is just a little bit different than the others. And I've just noticed on mine that it's actually this little piece of plastic that sits on the outside. It's just a little, it's got a little bit of a hairline crack in it and makes it a little bit loose. Look, once it's all in there and locked in, I'm comfortable with it. I don't think it's worth replacing an injector because I doubt I can buy that little part by itself. So we'll see how that goes. But the rest of these, let's just squeeze these O-rings on. Again, just being careful on these ones not to damage or break that. It's a little plastic top on them. Okay, so just looking back here, just get that pipe out of the way. Remember, we've got this insulating washer here, and they're really easy to drop, so be careful with these. Just get these bolts and washers out of the way. Grab this injector rail, and I'm just going to spray a bit of something on each of these just so they go in easily and don't get caught up. Just going to line them and just push them in a little bit. Come along, fit this washer in underneath there. And run that bolt through. Same on the other side, I'm just sitting that washer in place. There's a little lip that it sort of sits on, but be careful trusting that. Okay, now we're happy just to pop them all the way. Tighten these bolts up. And these are both just 12 mils. We'll just do these up nice and firm. Okay, so let's bring this intake in. I'm just going to take these bolts out of the way. So we've got two big long ones at the front. And these three smaller ones. Those up there. We've also got this bracket that sits on the side of the head. Should be able to zip that over the top there. And we just want to line it up on the two studs. Just make sure none of the wiring's got clipped caught as you've gone. Wiring at the back's still clear. Drop some of these bolts in and get them finger tight. On the two ends, we've just got a simple nut on each end that fits over that stud. And then we have the last two bolts that sit in onto this head and just support it on that bracket. Okay, so that's everything in finger tight. Let's go through and tighten it all up. Okay, with those bolts done up, we've got a little bit of wiring and piping that we just need to get in place. So we'll just want to clip things back how they should. Don't forget, there's this pipe that we clipped into that bracket underneath. Comes back up to a little vent at the back of the intake. So we've got that one in. This one comes out here for your emissions. And it's got a nice little holder here, so I like to make sure they're all clipped in. Clip back on. We've got the wiring for the actual throttle body, so that's clicked back in place. Got that vent tube. Again, it doesn't look like it's ever had a clamp on there, but look, being a vacuum tube, it's not going to blow off unless there was some serious backfire or something. I might have a look to see whether other people put clamps on that or not.